The full moon on October 7, 2025, rises in fiery Aries, igniting a wave of bold energy, emotional intensity and decisive action across the zodiac. This lunation encourages us to confront what we've been avoiding, take initiative and embrace transformation. Aries' influence brings courage but also impulsiveness, making it vital to channel this force wisely. Each sign will feel this moon differently depending on their elemental nature and planetary alignments. This plan outlines how each zodiac sign may be affected and what themes to explore in their forecast, offering guidance for reflection, release, and renewal. Aries, the unmasking begins. October 7th. The full moon rises in your sign, Aries, and with it comes a force that doesn't knock. It breaks the door down. You may feel it before you see it. A pulse in your chest, a sudden heat behind your eyes, a restless urge to move, to act, to confront. This is not a gentle moon. It's a mirror held to your face and it doesn't blink. For Aries, this lunation is personal. It's the kind of night where someone who's always been the leader, the one who charges ahead, who never shows doubt, sits alone and wonders, what have I been chasing? A woman who's built her life around being strong might feel her hands tremble as she realizes strength isn't silence. A man who's always been the first to speak may find himself speechless, overwhelmed by emotions he thought he'd buried. This moon doesn't just illuminate, it exposes. Old identities begin to crack. You might feel drawn to make a bold move, say something you've held back for years, or walk away from a role that no longer fits. But it's not rebellion, it's revelation. The energy is raw, electric, and alive. You may feel impulsive, but beneath that spark is something ancient. The call to be true. Not loud, not brave, just real. And when the dust settles, you won't be the same. You'll be closer to the version of yourself that's been waiting in the shadows, watching, knowing this moment would come. Taurus. The ground trembles softly. The full moon on October 7th doesn't knock loudly for Taurus. It hums beneath the surface like a distant drumbeat in the soil. You may not notice it at first. You'll go about your day, brew your tea, fold your sweaters, and then, something shifts. A memory, a scent, a silence that feels too loud. This moon stirs the 12th house for Taurus, the realm of dreams, secrets, and shadows. It's where the past lives and where the soul whispers. For Taurus, who thrives in the tangible, this lunar pull into the intangible can feel disorienting. You might find yourself waking from vivid dreams that linger like perfume, or walking through familiar places that suddenly feel haunted, not by ghosts but by versions of yourself you've forgotten. A man who's always relied on logic may feel drawn to poetry. A woman who's built her life on routine might skip her morning checklist, not out of rebellion, but because something deeper is calling. This moon doesn't demand action, it invites surrender. You may feel the urge to be alone, to cancel plans, to sit in silence without knowing why. And in that stillness, something ancient begins to rise. Old wounds, long buried, may surface, not to torment but to be seen. You may cry without knowing the reason, or laugh at something that once broke you. The full moon in Aries wants fire. But for Taurus, it burns underground. It's the slow cracking of a seed before the sprout. It's the ache before the healing. And if you listen closely, you'll hear it. The quiet unraveling of what no longer serves you. Not with noise, with knowing. Gemini. The whisper turns into a shout. The full moon on October 7th doesn't just light up the sky. It electrifies your mind, Gemini. Thoughts race, words sharpen, and the air around you feels charged with meaning. But this isn't your usual mental buzz. It's deeper, stranger. Like hearing your own voice echo back with a message you didn't expect. This moon activates your 11th house, the realm of friendships, dreams, and the invisible threads that tie you to others. You might find yourself suddenly questioning the people you've surrounded yourself with. A friend's offhand comment might linger longer than it should. A group chat might feel oddly silent or too loud. You may realize that some connections have become costumes, worn out, ill-fitting, no longer true. Picture a woman who's always been the life of the party, the one who keeps the jokes flowing and the energy high. On this night, she might sit in her car after a gathering, staring at her reflection in the rearview mirror, wondering why she felt so alone in a room full of people. Or a man who's always been the connector, the planner, the one who brings everyone together, he might suddenly feel the urge to leave the group thread, not out of anger but because he's tired of being the glue. The full moon doesn't break things, it reveals what's already broken. And for Gemini, it's the social mask that begins to slip. You may feel drawn to a new idea, a new tribe, a new dream. Or you may simply feel the need to be quiet for once, and listen to the voice that's been drowned out by noise. Cancer, the tide pulls from within. October 7's full moon doesn't knock on Cancer's door. It rises from the depths, like a forgotten wave returning to shore. You may feel it before you name it. A heaviness in the chest, a flicker of memory, a sudden longing for something you can't quite touch. This lunation activates your 10th house, the realm of legacy, reputation, and the roles you play in the world. But for Cancer, who lives through emotion, this is not about ambition. It's about the cost of visibility. You may find yourself standing in a room you've worked hard to reach. A promotion, a recognition, a milestone, and feel strangely hollow. A woman who's spent years climbing the ladder, sacrificing sleep and softness, might look at her corner office and wonder why it feels like a cage. A man who's always been the provider, the protector, the one who never falters, may feel the urge to walk into the woods and scream, not from rage but from the ache of being unseen. This moon doesn't ask you to quit. It asks you to feel. To notice where your public life has eclipsed your private truth. You may be praised, applauded, even envied, and yet something inside you whispers, "This isn't all of me." The full moon in Aries brings fire, but for Cancer, it's the fire behind the eyes. The quiet burn of suppressed emotion, the slow boil of unmet needs. You may find yourself drawn to your roots, your family, your past. Or you may feel the need to redefine what success means, not in titles but in tenderness. This is not a breakdown. It's a breakthrough. And when the tide recedes, you'll see what was buried beneath the surface all along. Leo, the spotlight flickers. On October 7th, the full moon doesn't just rise, it roars. And for Leo, it's not the applause that echoes, but the silence between the claps. This lunation activates your 9th house, the realm of beliefs, truth, and distant horizons. But this isn't about travel. It's about the journey inward. The kind that begins when the stage lights dim and you're left alone with the script you've been reciting for years. You may feel a sudden dissonance between who you are and what you've been preaching. A teacher who's inspired hundreds might pause mid-sentence, realizing she no longer believes the words she's saying. A man who's built his life around certainty, quotes, mantras, philosophies, may find himself staring at a blank page, unsure what comes next. This moon doesn't strip you of your fire. It challenges what fuels it. You may feel drawn to question your convictions, your mentors, even your gods. Not out of rebellion but because something deeper is stirring. A truth that doesn't need validation. A belief that doesn't need a podium. You might feel the urge to escape, to book a trip, change your scenery, chase the horizon. But the real shift is internal. It's the moment you realize the map you've been following was drawn by someone else. And now the compass is in your hands. The full moon in Aries brings urgency. But for Leo, it's not about speed, it's about direction. You may feel disoriented, even betrayed by your own ideals. Yet beneath that confusion is clarity waiting to be born. This isn't a crisis of faith. It's a rebirth of vision. And when the spotlight returns, you'll be speaking a truth that's finally yours. Virgo, the pattern fractures. October 7's full moon doesn't arrive with chaos for Virgo. It arrives with precision. Like a scalpel. Like a whisper that cuts deeper than a scream. This lunation activates your 8th house, the domain of secrets, intimacy, and transformation. But for Virgo, who finds safety in order, this moon doesn't rearrange the furniture. It burns the blueprint. You may feel it in the smallest things. A spreadsheet that suddenly feels meaningless. A conversation that veers into territory you weren't prepared to explore. A glance from someone close that says more than words ever could. This moon doesn't ask for logic. It demands surrender. A woman who's always kept her emotions in check, who journals, meditates, plans, might find herself sobbing in the shower, not from sadness, but from the sudden release of everything she's held in. A man who's always been the fixer, the one who solves problems before they arise, may feel helpless in the face of a truth he can't control. Someone he loves is changing and he can't stop it. The full moon in Aries brings fire, and for Virgo, it's the fire that melts the mask of perfection. You may feel drawn to confront a fear you've avoided, to speak a truth you've edited for years, or to let someone see you without the armor. Not because it's safe, but because it's time. This isn't about breaking down. It's about breaking open. The patterns you've relied on may no longer hold. The rituals may feel hollow. And in that emptiness, something wild and real begins to grow. You won't find it in the checklist. You'll find it in the crack. Libra, the balance breaks. October 7's full moon doesn't arrive gently for Libra. It tilts the scales. Not with chaos but with clarity. This lunation lands directly opposite your sign, illuminating the 7th house of relationships, mirrors and the delicate dance of we. But this isn't a ballroom, it's a reckoning. You may feel it in the quiet tension between words. A conversation that feels rehearsed. A smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The full moon doesn't expose others. It reflects you. And for Libra, who often finds identity through connection, this reflection may be startling. A woman who's always been the peacekeeper, soft-spoken, accommodating, endlessly patient, might find herself interrupting mid-sentence not out of rudeness, but because she's tired of swallowing her truth. A man who's built his life around partnership, shared decisions, shared dreams, may wake up and realize he's been compromising pieces of himself he never meant to give away. This moon doesn't ask you to leave anyone. It asks you to find yourself within the bond. You may feel drawn to confront a dynamic that's long been imbalanced. Or you may simply notice how often you say yes when your soul whispers no. The full moon in Aries brings fire, and for Libra, it's the fire that burns through politeness. You may feel raw, exposed, even misunderstood. But beneath that discomfort is a truth that's been waiting to be spoken, not with anger but with certainty. This isn't about choosing solitude over connection. It's about choosing authenticity over performance. And when the scales settle, you'll know which weight was never yours to carry. Scorpio, the veil tears quietly. October 7's full moon doesn't crash into Scorpio. It slips beneath the skin. It moves like a shadow, like a secret you thought you buried long ago. This lunation activates your 6th house, the realm of routines, health and service. But for Scorpio, who thrives in the depths, this moon doesn't just ask for better habits. It demands a reckoning with what you've been hiding in plain sight. You may feel it in your body first. A sudden fatigue that doesn't match your schedule. A craving for silence in the middle of a crowded day. A moment where the usual rhythm, wake, work, repeat, feels foreign, even hostile. This isn't burnout. It's exposure. A woman who's always been the dependable one, never missing a deadline, always showing up, always saying I'm fine, might find herself staring at her calendar, unable to move. Not because she's weak, but because her soul refuses to be ignored. A man who's built his life around discipline. Early mornings, clean eating, relentless productivity, may feel the urge to sleep until noon, not out of laziness but because something deeper is shifting. The full moon in Aries brings heat, and for Scorpio, it's the heat that rises from the cracks. You may feel drawn to break a pattern, to cancel a commitment, to say no where you've always said yes. Not to rebel but to reclaim. This isn't about self-improvement. It's about self-confrontation. The rituals you've clung to may no longer serve the person you're becoming. And in the quiet rebellion of rest, of refusal, of release, you'll find the truth you've been circling for years. It was never in the routine. It was in the rupture. Sagittarius, the horizon shifts. October 7's full moon doesn't arrive with answers for Sagittarius. It arrives with questions. Big ones. Ones that don't fit neatly into your usual optimism or your love of the open road. This lunation activates your 5th house, the realm of creativity, romance and self-expression. But for Sagittarius, who often seeks meaning in motion, this moon doesn't point outward. It turns the compass inward. You may feel it as a sudden pause in your momentum. A project that once thrilled you now feels hollow. A relationship that sparked adventure now feels like a mirror. A man who's always chased the next thrill, new cities, new faces, new ideas, might find himself staring at an old photo wondering why it still makes his chest ache. A woman who's built her life around freedom may feel strangely tethered by a single sentence spoken by someone she didn't expect to matter. This moon doesn't take away your fire. It asks what you've been burning for. You may feel drawn to revisit an old passion not because it's practical but because it still sings. Or you may feel the need to step back from a romance that's begun to feel like a performance. Not out of fear but because the script no longer fits. The full moon in Aries brings urgency, and for Sagittarius, it's the urgency to be real. To create not for applause but for truth. To love not for escape but for depth. You may feel restless, but beneath that is a deeper hunger. for authenticity, for intimacy, for something that doesn't vanish when the journey ends. This isn't about losing your spark. It's about finding the flame that was never meant to be shared with the crowd. Capricorn, the structure shivers. October 7's full moon doesn't storm into Capricorn. It knocks once, then waits. But the sound echoes through the walls you've built. This lunation activates your fourth house, the foundation of home, family, and emotional roots. And for Capricorn, who often finds safety in structure, this moon doesn't ask for renovation. It threatens collapse. You may feel it in the quiet moments. A room that suddenly feels too small. A tradition that no longer comforts. A silence at the dinner table that stretches longer than usual. This isn't about drama. It's about the slow realization that something essential has shifted. A woman who's always been the pillar, organizing holidays, managing finances, keeping the peace, might find herself staring at a childhood photo, wondering when she stopped feeling safe. A man who's built his life around responsibility, mortgage paid, career stable, family provided for, may feel a strange emptiness in the middle of his success. Not because he's failed, but because he's forgotten what softness feels like. The full moon in Aries brings heat, and for Capricorn, it's the heat that rises from the cracks in the foundation. You may feel drawn to revisit your past, to question the stories you were raised on, or to confront a family dynamic that's long gone unspoken. Not to destroy, but to understand. This isn't about abandoning what you've built. It's about asking whether it was ever truly yours. The walls may tremble, but what remains will be real. And in that truth, you'll find a new kind of strength. One that doesn't need to be proven, only felt. The structure doesn't fall. It breathes. Aquarius. The signal distorts. October 7's full moon doesn't arrive with clarity for Aquarius. It arrives like static. A signal half heard, half felt, vibrating through the wires of your mind. This lunation activates your third house, the realm of communication, thought, and local connections. But for Aquarius, who often lives in the future, this moon doesn't speak in logic. It speaks in riddles. You may feel it in your words. A sentence that lands wrong. A message that doesn't get sent. A conversation that spirals into something you didn't expect. This isn't miscommunication. It's revelation disguised as confusion. A woman who's always been articulate, who crafts her thoughts like architecture, might find herself stammering in front of someone she thought she understood. Not because she's lost her voice, but because the language between them has changed. A man who's always relied on intellect, facts, data, clarity, may feel haunted by a dream he can't explain, one that lingers like smoke in his chest. The full moon in Aries brings heat, and for Aquarius, it's the heat that short-circuits the system. You may feel drawn to write, to speak, to confess, but the words may come out jagged, raw, real. Or you may feel the need to go silent, not out of withdrawal, but because the noise outside no longer matches the truth within. This isn't about losing your voice. It's about finding the frequency that's truly yours. The one that doesn't need approval, doesn't need translation, doesn't need to be understood by everyone. And when the static clears, you'll realize the distortion was never in the signal. It was in the silence you kept to stay safe. Pisces. The dream dissolves. October 7's full moon doesn't blaze into Pisces. It drifts in like mist. Soft, strange, and impossible to ignore. It activates your second house, the realm of value, stability, and self-worth. But for Pisces, who often lives between worlds, this moon doesn't ask what you own. It asks what you believe you deserve. You may feel it in the quiet corners of your life. A bill you forgot to pay. A compliment that feels uncomfortable. A moment where you look at your reflection and wonder if you've been too generous with your silence. This isn't about money, it's about meaning. A woman who's always given more than she's received, time, love, forgiveness, might find herself hesitating before saying yes again. Not because she's bitter, but because she's finally listening to the ache beneath her generosity. A man who's always brushed off praise, shrugging, deflecting, laughing, may feel a sudden need to be seen not as humble but as worthy. The full moon in Aries brings fire, and for Pisces, it's the fire that evaporates illusion. You may feel drawn to reassess your relationship with abundance, not just financial but emotional. You may notice where you've settled, where you've compromised, where you've mistaken sacrifice for love. This isn't about becoming selfish. It's about becoming whole. The dream you've been living may begin to dissolve. Not because it was wrong, but because it was never truly yours. And in the space it leaves behind, something real begins to form. Not a fantasy, a foundation,